Well, it's my greatest pleasure and honor to be here to have this dialogue with you, Gerard. First of all, I want to say that your book, Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil, or in German, Wahrheit sagen, Teufel jagen, I read your book and it had a great impact on my understanding of the problem of our times. You present our own history here in a way that no one else really has up to this point. I've never seen anything like that before. And the fact that you wrote this book, I don't think that's a coincidence, because your dad, Yehudi Menuhin, his talent went beyond just music. I mean, he was probably one of the greatest violinists of the last century, but I know he also was a great supporter of Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the communist times. And it's astounding how he had this sense for truth and what is right and what is proper. And that's what you have now too. You're fighting for the truth. You're fighting for the dissidents of our time, like Horst Mahler, and that's astounding.
Well, about Solzhenitsyn, he is really one of the most valuable witnesses we have of the times there, and in those days, the suffering. And his book, 200 Years Together, which has not yet, so far as I know, been translated into English, really should be, because there is a lot to be learnt from that book and from his insights. A wise man. Mahler is another matter in that he, while also being a crusader for truth, has suffered physically to such an extent that he lost a leg in captivity as a result of his bad medical treatment in prison, and has taken it upon himself, really in his own way, single-handedly to lead the fight for truth for Germany. And I really must hope that in his exile he will receive the support that he deserves, because he continues to suffer. At least he is not, which would have been the case, condemned to death in prison. There is no doubt he almost died during the first term there. It was interrupted, and then it was decided to send him back for another, I think, 3 years or so, and that is a death penalty.
Yeah, well, they haven't. They're trying to basically silence people any way they can. They're not yet using the methods as brutally as they did in the Soviet Union, but nobody can say they won't go that far if given the opportunity. But with the censorship, well, you're saying that the 200 Years Together has not been translated into English, and that is really too bad, because that is an extremely important book, and the parallels shown in that book with today's situation are remarkable. But speaking of censorship, these books, Amazon has just banned these books from their inventory, so that's a censorship as we're seeing it today. But one of the main facets of this whole story is basically the money system, and in Germany at that time, and the extrication of Germany from the money system that we all have now, that's one of the key. That's one of the most important parts of that. And now we find ourselves, we have to deal with this system that the defeat of the Third Reich basically failed to defeat. We are now faced or confronted with the same problem. A money system that has reached end of the line. It's a fiat money system, and every fiat money system comes to its end of life, and that's where we're at right now.
Yes, I would say that's part of the problem. The solution to the money system seems to be to deprive us of cash, to force us to use credit cards, which gives banks the power to control our lives to that extent that they can withhold our own money from us, which they couldn't do if we just had cash at home, for instance, or somewhere else. But that's only one of the major threats today. Another is mass migration. And all these different major threads are gradually coming to a head, and at some point in the future, one doesn't know when, there will be a major explosion. On the way there will be a gradual increase in the dangers of civil war. That must happen because the indigenous population will have to defend itself somehow. It can't give way on every front to people who are only here because they perceive it as a paradise where they can snatch anything they want. So we have to prepare ourselves. We have to defend ourselves in any way we can. The first step towards defense is to learn how these things came about. In other words, the historic truth. The historic truth is easy to find out if one is curious enough. It's all there in the internet or in some books, and the steps towards our present predicament are very clearly shown if we take every major incident going back to 2001, 9/11, going back further to Pearl Harbor. Interestingly enough, almost the same number of people had to sacrifice their lives in these various two good causes, going back to the Gulf of Tonkin, going back to the Philippines before that. These are all presumably motivated by the same people and their cause. Only the people who are employed to carry them out are our governments, mostly what we think of as our democratic governments that are there to represent us and carry out our wishes or fulfill our needs, better put. And they've never managed to do this in half a century, more since the war, for instance, previously also not. And the major question could be, why isn't this so? Why is there no reliable health system?
Yeah, you listed a number of points that are all coming together now, and I call that the perfect storm. The fiat money system is coming to its end. Just at this moment when we're going to have to deal with this incredibly difficult problem that we have to deal with, that we have this tsunami of invaders coming in, defined as refugees, but of course only a tiny fraction of them are actually refugees. And even the refugees that came, they're only, in the old days, they would be entitled to stay here until they could go back home again. But now they seem to be opening the floodgates to just basically a tsunami of mostly young men from Africa and Asia, and they are here basically to destabilize and destroy us, because the elements that are responsible for this and for all the lies and all the major conflicts of the past know that the best way to protect themselves is to bring us in such a condition that we cannot possibly even defend ourselves. And yet for us to survive, we need to defend ourselves, but in order to defend ourselves, we need to understand what has happened, and especially we need to be able to use our brains again to think properly. And yet that is precisely what we are not able to do. We are not able to think properly anymore, because when we do start to think properly, we are pounded down with the with control words that have a very negative that trigger very negative emotions, and that's what the censorship is also all about. So this is how all these things tie together. And as you mentioned 9/11. Yeah, 9/11 is just another single link in a long chain of events that have led us into the predicament that we find ourselves in today.
Yes, I think it might be interesting to explore some of the words that are misused and overused these days, which have taken on completely different meanings. Take the word toleration, tolerance. That actually means intolerance for any people who don't agree with those who use those words in a false way. They are intolerant of anyone who doesn't see the world their way. Or take the epithet racist. That's a very common weapon used against anyone who says anything against the hordes of migrants. And what is a racist? I would say that it's a basic concept used by many people, some quite frequently, surprisingly. I've used a couple of sources in my book. I've quoted a couple of sources from maybe unexpected people, but you have to read the book for yourself. But a definition which is a harmless one, a straightforward one, is that when I'm in Western Europe, I don't expect to be confronted with large numbers of people from Northern Africa. If I want to see more of them or be among them, I will go to Africa and show the right kind of respect for their way of life. If they're here, they should respect our way of life, and that seems to be perfectly straightforward. Also, the unfortunate reputation of some people is that they do definitely pose a threat. Now, whether this is a threat that is justified or not, if you walk down a major city street in the early morning hours and you see coming towards you not a group of local people who may be coming back from a nightclub, but an undefined group of North Africans, you are perfectly justified to fear that they may plan to rob you because you're there, just because they've come across you. And if that is a definition of racism, I'm sorry, but it seems to me a perfectly logical deduction of a condition or a moment in anyone's life. And I resent not being able to walk down a major street or a minor street in a major city at 4 a.m. if I should so choose to do so, because I it's my city, it's my place, and I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel at home there. That would be my answer to the epithet racist. Maybe that's narrow-minded of me.
Well, you hit it right on. Actually, to be racist is perfectly natural and normal, and yet they have taken that word and defined it with a very negative, attached very negative emotions to it, or it was supposed to be, these negative emotions are supposed to be triggered with that word, and that is what they've done with so many words, and that is what is preventing us from thinking properly. But we have to be able to think properly to defend ourselves, and this is the desired result of the psychological warfare that has been perpetrated against us. So I think one of the key parts for one of the most important parts of the battle we have to win is to have people understand the meaning of these words, and they have to become immune to these words. And I say somebody has successfully immunized themselves against these words if they have no reaction anymore when these words are used against them. Because nowadays, if you look at the mainstream press, and there are often just strings of nothing but these words. They'll say somebody's a neo-Nazi, racist, a Holocaust denier, blah, blah, blah. All these things. And if you look at what these words actually say, they are all completely meaningless. Things turned on their head that are supposed to trigger certain reactions. And, well, that's part of the healing process, which we need to succeed in to survive. It's a little bit like if you were a good runner, a real sportsman, but had 2 broken legs. It would not be right for me to call you a bad sportsman just because you have broken legs. Once those legs are healed, you can run again as you once could. And that's what's happened with our minds. Our minds have been basically put in a crippled state through these weaponized control words. And we have to heal our minds in our whole society to be able to come to terms with the situation that we have to deal with.
Yes, I think that part of that healing process involves not reacting defensively to these words when we're accused of something. First of all, it shouldn't matter to us what another person who takes these words seriously thinks. Secondly, as you say, I think, or you imply, these words are perfectly ordinary words, they have definitions which have existed in dictionaries for a very long time. The fact that they have been chosen to be misused is entirely a different matter. The people who've decided to do this are clever psychologists, and they have pinpointed certain words which can trigger actions or thoughts, and that's all it is. Psychological warfare is something that has been very, very highly developed, presumably at least since or during the First World War, and it's now become normal practice. It's part of any warfare, and that involves, of course, lies. And the lie is something that we must stand up against. We must not take for granted what people tell us. The news every day on the major channels is composed of, very often, of lies. Not 100%, but to a great extent. Sometimes they're out-and-out lies, as in the case of Bashar al-Assad's latest chemical attack on his own people. Of course he didn't do that, and there is no proof that he did that. And yet the lies were so powerfully distributed in the media, that it enabled this attack with 59 missiles. So a lie can produce a lot of reactions, and the ultimate achievement of such a lie is far from the initial point, which would have been, let's find out what in fact did occur. But that's not what it's about. What it's about, in the case of Syria, of course, is removing the president from power and taking over the country. So any means, any lie is good for that. It's just a shame that so many people will sit still for them and nod along.
Well, that stresses the point. That is the reason why people have to stop just taking these lies, and they have to start thinking for themselves and voicing their objection to the lies, and voicing their. It's no longer we can no longer tolerate these lies, because it is our silence to these lies that enables them to continue at doing these things over and over again. I mean, you mentioned the poison gas attack in Syria. I mean, that wasn't even the first time they did that before, and it was a lie. But nothing happened, so they do it again. The same lie, the same silence, And you were saying before something about the words that they've been around a long time, these weaponized control words, and even it's not that long even. The word racist, for example, was first brought into life and during the Russian Revolution and it was used by the communists against the Russians who stood up for their old cultural values and the White Russians, or the Tsar and these old values, the tradition. They were called racist. So it was a completely meaningless, weaponized word for those people who wanted to defend their own identity. And that's how it's being used against us now. We want to protect our identity, and we are being accused of being a racist. You see? But I'm sure that this recognition of these methods and the awakening that's happening will result in a critical number of people healing themselves, becoming immune to these words, and this is the first step in overcoming the system. So I myself feel fairly confident that we will come out of this victorious. There's no other, the alternative to coming out of this victorious is death, essentially. And no matter how they attack us to silence us, they put us in prison, it will not stop the truth. And I'm sure that this year will be a very important year in advancing this truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope that's the case. I had a thought about a paragraph I wrote at the end of my book, which was supposed to be an incentive for positive action, that I could read out. I was thinking of, I will see if it's relevant or not.
Do.
See if you think
do.
It's relevant. It's a sort of exhortation to people. We must act, not react. We must act collectively. Strength comes only in numbers. We must transform ourselves from consumers who amass debt into thinking individuals who develop common interests. We must close our accounts with all banks and place our savings in cooperative, non-profit, community institutions which will not reward or penalize depositors nor reward interest on investment, but will give each depositor equal rights. We must unanimously, simultaneously, collectively refuse to pay taxes to redeem debt. But we must also change our behavior so that money itself, as a means of exchange, is replaced by barter. Above all, we must demonstrate peacefully in the thousands, in the hundreds of thousands, in the millions, even in the face of militaristic police. Many state employees are sympathetic to us. We must bring the economy to a stop when and for as long as it suits us. Then the struggle really begins. The struggle between government and the people, between us and them. The battle over freedom or submission, between remotely controlled politicians far removed from their respective electorates and the vast majority of ordinary people they purport to represent. In short, the battle between truth and lies.
Well, that's very good. That's a good closing statement. So, John, thank you very much then for the dialogue, and it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.